The story I am about to share with you today took place in Daegu, a city located in southeastern South Korea. This city is surrounded by mountain ranges. In the western district of Dalseo, there is a mountain named Hwaryeong, which stands at approximately 983 feet in elevation. This mountain became the scene of a shocking incident that shook all of South Korea. 5 young boys went to play on the mountain together and then vanished. This case became one of the 3 most mysterious cases in South Korean history, known as the Frog Boys Missing Case. To understand the details, let's go back to March 26, 1991, a Tuesday. Although it wasn't a weekend, it was a national holiday because local parliamentary elections were taking place across South Korea. For children, a day off school meant excitement and joy. At 8:20 a.m., 6 boys gathered to play together. They were Kim Jong-sik, 9 years old, Park Chan-in, 10 years old, Kim Young-gyu, 11 years old, Jo Ho-yeon, 12 years old, Woo Cheol-won, 13 years old, and Kim Tae-ryong, 9 years old. All of them were students from 3rd to 6th grade at Seongseo Elementary School in Daegu, a school located at the base of Hwaryeong Mountain. Their homes were also in nearby villages. At that moment, they were playing near Jo Ho-yeon's house. While they were playing, a young tenant from the house came outside, complaining about the noise and telling the children to play elsewhere. The boys then huddled together, discussing where to go next. Someone suggested going to Hwaryeong Mountain to hunt for fire salamander eggs. Fire salamanders are amphibians that inhabit forests and hills, laying between 10 and 60 eggs at a time. After agreeing on their destination, the group dispersed, each heading home to grab supplies and inform their families. Of the 6 boys, only Kim Tae-ryong mentioned his plans to his parents. However, his parents deemed the mountain too far and forbade him from going. Reluctantly, he had to abandon the trip. The remaining 5 boys gathered supplies. Some brought empty containers for the eggs, while others carried wooden sticks. They laughed and joked as they made their way toward Hwaryeong Mountain. The morning passed quickly, and soon it was noon. The boys' parents, noticing their children hadn't returned home, assumed they were too absorbed in playing and didn't worry much. It wasn't until 6:30 p.m. that Kim Young-gyu's mother, while busy with housework, suddenly felt uneasy. She stopped what she was doing and went outside to look around, but the streets were eerily quiet, and her son was nowhere to be seen. By now it was dark. Although the place the boys had gone to play was not far from their homes, and they had been there before, it seemed unusual that they hadn't returned yet. The longer Kim Young-gyu's mother thought about it, the more worried she became. She decided to leave the house and visit the homes of her son's friends to search for him. On the way, she noticed many people gathered and talking. As she approached, she learned that the 5 boys who had gone to the mountain that morning still hadn't returned. The parents quickly organized themselves, grabbing flashlights, and headed to the mountain to search for the children. They called out their children's names as they searched, but there was no response. After searching for a long time without any sign of the boys, at 7:50 p.m., the parents descended the mountain and reported the incident to the police station. However, the police did not immediately launch a search operation. That day, local parliamentary elections were taking place across the country, and most police officers were deployed to maintain order. Moreover, less than 24 hours had passed since the boys' disappearance. The officer on duty reassured the parents not to worry, suggesting that the children would likely return home soon. Unsatisfied with the police's inaction, the parents didn't give up. They returned to the mountain to continue searching, this time joined by some kind-hearted neighbors. Unfortunately, that evening it started to rain, making the search even more difficult. Clad in raincoats and armed with flashlights, they scoured the slopes of Hwaryeong Mountain. By 3 a.m., everyone was exhausted and had to halt their search, returning home. The following day, more than 300 people, including police officers and military personnel, were mobilized to search Hwaryeong Mountain. By the afternoon, helicopters were also deployed to assist in the search. However, there was still no trace of the 5 boys. Meanwhile, the police began canvassing the area, questioning residents living near the mountain. From these efforts, they gathered some testimonies from witnesses. Jo Ho-yeon's older brother, the sibling of one of the missing boys, told police that around 9 a.m. that day, he was biking home and passed by the base of the mountain. He saw his younger brother with 4 other boys heading up the mountain. When he asked where they were going, his brother cheerfully replied that they were searching for fire salamander eggs. The older brother reminded him to return home for lunch before heading on his way. Another witness, a woman, reported to the police that at approximately 9:30 a.m., after casting her vote in the election, she saw 5 children carrying boxes and sticks as they happily walked toward Warryong Mountain. She overheard them discussing whether they would have time to return home for lunch. Since she was in a hurry to get home, she didn't pay much attention to them. A student named Hyun Sung-hoon also provided testimony to the police. He stated that he and the 5 missing boys were students at Seongseo Elementary School in Daegu. However, he didn't see them that day. Hyun explained that he and some other classmates also went up Warryong Mountain that morning to search for fire salamander eggs. Around 11:30 a.m., Hyun reached the cemetery area on the mountain when he suddenly heard a loud scream from afar. About 10 seconds later, there was another scream, 2 in total. The sound was terrifying, unlike the playful shouting of children. Frightened, Hyun didn't dare investigate where the screams were coming from. The parents of the boys believed the screams could have been cries for help from the victims after being attacked. However, the police dismissed this lead, as another witness claimed to have seen the 5 boys near the mountain's base around noon that same day. The police speculated that the screams might have come from birds or wild animals on the mountain. Additionally, other witnesses provided further information. For instance, a 42-year-old villager reported seeing 5 boys playing near a pond close to the village at around 4:30 p.m. that day. However, it's important to note that all witness accounts were based on personal memory and could be inaccurate. These inconsistencies significantly impacted the police's judgment. The police initially suspected that the boys may have had conflicts at home and ran away out of frustration, only to get lost and unable to find their way back. However, the parents firmly rejected this theory. They insisted their families were harmonious and they never scolded or hit their children. The boys had no reason to suddenly run away. Among the 5, the oldest was Woo Chil-won, aged 13, and the youngest was Kim Jong-sik, aged 9. It seemed highly unlikely that such a group of young children would decide to run away together. The investigation then shifted to the theory of a crime by an acquaintance, suspecting that someone known to the victims' families might have been involved. However, after thorough investigation, the police concluded that the boys' families were honest, well-regarded, and maintained good relationships with their neighbors. There had been no conflict significant enough to provoke such a cruel act against innocent children. Subsequently, the police considered the possibility of kidnapping. 3 days after the incident, on March 29th, Kim Jong-sik's father and uncle received phone calls from an unidentified man. The caller, who sounded about 30 years old, claimed to have kidnapped the 5 boys and demanded a ransom of 4 million won, approximately $2,850 at the current exchange rate. Kim Ju-hwan, Kim Jong-sik's father, quickly gathered the money and rushed to the designated meeting point on Warryong Mountain. He waited for hours, but no one showed up. Afterward, the caller never made contact again. Following the incident, the young tenant near Jo Ho-yeon's home was filled with regret. He blamed himself, thinking that if he hadn't told the boys to leave that day, they might not have disappeared. The police also faced harsh criticism from the public for failing to act promptly and losing the golden window for locating the children. Initially, news of the incident spread only within the village and nearby areas. Later, the disappearance of the 5 boys was picked up by the media, attracting nationwide attention. Early reports stated that the boys had gone to the mountain to catch frogs, which led to them being nicknamed the Frog Boys. However, the truth was that they had gone to look for fire salamander eggs. To simplify things for the public, the name Frog Boys continued to be used and is still widely recognized today. By April 1st, 6 days after the incident, the parents of the Frog Boys had printed 50,000 flyers to distribute at train stations, bus stops, and other crowded public places across Daegu. They also offered a reward of 2 million won for any useful information about their children's whereabouts. The case grew increasingly serious, eventually catching the attention of South Korea's then president, Roh Tae-woo. Deeply concerned, President Roh ordered the police to use all available resources to investigate the case. Following the president's directive, police and military forces worked together to thoroughly search Hwaryong Mountain and the surrounding areas. Every inch of land was meticulously examined. Near Hwaryong Mountain, there was a reservoir where a child had previously drowned, leading some to suspect that the boys might have gone there after playing on the mountain. To verify this theory, rescue teams pumped the water out of the reservoir, but nothing was found. As public interest in the case grew, the family's phone numbers were leaked to the public. The police installed wiretapping devices on these lines, anticipating potential leads. Indeed, they received numerous calls, but most were from pranksters. Some calls featured children's voices, followed by abrupt hang-ups. After investigation, the police concluded that the majority of these were hoaxes. However, it remained possible that the real perpetrator had called, though no conclusive evidence could be established. In August 1992, the police received a call from an unidentified man who claimed that the Frog Boys were buried in the basement of a building in Gyeongsangbuk-do. When pressed for more details, the man immediately hung up. The building he described was the only high-rise with a basement near the boys' homes. The police investigated thoroughly but found nothing, ultimately concluding that this too was a malicious prank. During the search process, tensions arose between reporters accompanying the police and local residents. The months-long investigation yielded no results, leaving the boys' parents utterly devastated. Despite the constant disruptions caused by false leads, the police remained hopeful, considering the possibility that the boys were still alive, perhaps kidnapped or sold elsewhere. The reward for finding the Frog Boys was raised to 42 million won, equivalent to 30,000 USD. Desperate to find their children, the boys' parents quit their jobs, pooled their resources to buy a truck, and traveled across Daegu and even nationwide distributing flyers. Some businesses volunteered to help by printing the boys' photos on phone cards, cigarette packages, food packaging, and even creating TV advertisements for missing persons. One company even featured their images on a giant hot air balloon. By November, the police had received nearly 1,000 calls, but the vast majority turned out to be false leads. By November 1992, a year and a half after the incident, a movie titled Comeback Frog Boys, inspired by the case, was released. The case once again shocked South Korea and became a hot topic of national conversation. Due to the long-standing deadlock in the investigation, numerous rumors began to circulate. Some speculated that the boys had been kidnapped by North Korean spies. Others suggested they had been abducted by individuals suffering from Hansen's disease to be used in treatments. Despite the implausibility of these claims, the police investigated them. However, the results yielded nothing, and tensions even arose with patients during the investigation process. More fantastical rumors also emerged, including claims that the boys were not human and had been abducted by aliens. Over the course of the extended search, approximately 320,000 people from all walks of life, including military personnel, participated in the efforts. In 1995, 4 years after the boys' disappearance, the police used computer technology to create age-progressed portraits of the Frog Boys and printed them on flyers. Over 2 million flyers were distributed, but the effort only led to false reports. Desperate, the police even turned to shamans for assistance in locating the boys. As time passed, the case gradually faded from public memory, and the parents, burdened by life's demands, had to return to work to make a living. In January 1996, Professor Kim Ka-won, a criminal psychology expert from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, KAIST, made a shocking claim. He alleged that the Frog Boys had been murdered by Kim Jong-sik's father, Kim Cheol-gyu, and that their bodies were buried in his home. Outraged by the accusation, Kim Cheol-gyu vehemently denied the claim, asserting that he could never commit such a heinous act against his own child. KAIST, a prestigious national research university ranked among the top 5 in South Korea, lent credibility to Professor Kim's statements. Taking the institute's reputation into account, the police believed the professor. Though devastated and indignant, Kim Cheol-gyu reluctantly agreed to allow the police to excavate his home to prove his innocence. In January 1996, following Professor Kim's directions, the police began digging and demolishing parts of Kim Cheol-gyu's house. Curious onlookers gathered outside, eager to witness whether the man was truly a murderer. Police searched every corner of the property, from the bathroom and storage areas to the yard. Reporters were also present, documenting the events. After an hour and 40 minutes, the house was left in ruins, but nothing was found. The crowd fell silent as they stared at the empty, torn-up house. Overcome with emotion, Kim Cheol-gyu cried out in anguish, "Losing my child has caused me unimaginable pain, and I've been struggling to survive ever since. Now, someone accuses me of burying my child's body in my home? This is absurd." Following the incident, Professor Kim Kwon faced widespread public criticism. His baseless allegations caused immense harm to Kim Cheol-gyu's family. KAST dismissed Professor Kim and prosecuted him for defamation. Nonetheless, he stubbornly defended his claims and even published a book titled "The Trident Didn't Go to the Mathan." Although cleared of suspicion, the ordeal left Kim Cheol-gyu severely traumatized. He turned to alcohol to cope and eventually passed away from liver cancer in October 2001. Previously, he had been a healthy man, even practicing judo in his youth. However, the grief of losing his child and years of heavy drinking took a devastating toll on his health. Until his death, he never had the chance to reunite with his beloved son. In September 2002, 11 and a half years after the case began, there was finally a breakthrough. On September 26th, Daegu police received a report from a 60-year-old man. He explained that while hiking Warryong Mountain to gather chestnuts, he had been using a hiking stick to dig through dirt, rocks, and leaves along the path. Midway up the mountain, he uncovered what appeared to be clothing buried in the soil. Curious, he dug further and was shocked to discover a human skull. In fact, a day earlier, police had received a similar report from another caller who claimed to have seen remains on Warryong Mountain. However, since the area had already been thoroughly searched and the police had dealt with years of prank calls, they dismissed the report as another hoax. But after receiving the second call, they took it seriously and immediately dispatched officers to the location provided by the informant. At a shallow dirt pit, police uncovered 4 sets of skeletal remains stacked on top of each other, with a large rock placed over the bones. Approximately 492 feet away, they found a 5th set of remains. The characteristics match those of the 5 missing boys. Large and small holes were found on the skulls of 3 sets of remains. The clothing discovered in the soil was not worn in the usual way, but had been separated from the bones and tied together. Although the bodies had fully decomposed, the boys' families identified the clothing as what their children had worn on the day they disappeared. After holding on to hope for over 15 years that their children might still be alive and living elsewhere, the families were left devastated by the confirmation of their deaths. Police hypothesized that the boys had stayed on the mountain playing until late in the evening, and then got lost. To avoid losing each other, they theorized the boys removed their jackets, tied them together to form a long rope, and held on to each other's hands. As night fell and the temperature dropped, the boys huddled together for warmth. It was suggested that they may have accidentally fallen unconscious after hitting sharp rocks. However, this theory was strongly rejected by the victims' families. The families argued that their children's homes were located right at the base of Warryong Mountain. This was not their first time visiting the mountain. They frequently played there and knew the area well. Moreover, the mountain itself was not tall. Even at night, the lights from the houses at the foot of the mountain were clearly visible. The site where the bodies were discovered was only about 1.8 miles from their homes and just 1,640 feet from the nearest village, making it nearly impossible for them to have gotten lost. Near the site, Police found over 10 bullet casings and spent shells of various types. Waryong Mountain was close to a firing range used by the 50th Infantry Brigade of the 2nd Division. This led to suspicions that the boys might have been accidentally killed by stray bullets. However, this theory was quickly dismissed because it was highly improbable for 5 individuals to be struck by stray bullets simultaneously. Moreover, even if someone had illegally used firearms, it was unlikely that no one heard gunshots. After further analysis, police determined that the indentations on the victims' skulls did not match injuries caused by bullets. It was speculated that the bullets had likely been picked up by the boys during their play. The police's excavation of the site, covered by the media, sparked intense public criticism. The public accused the police of acting hastily, failing to preserve the crime scene, and demonstrating a lack of professionalism. Their use of pickaxes to dig, and the casual manner in which they placed the remains into bags, were also heavily condemned. At the scene, the police examined only one set of remains and hastily concluded that the cause of death was due to getting lost and hypothermia. However, the forensic team from Kyungpook National University conducted a more thorough autopsy. The results revealed no injuries on the bones of Park Chan-in and Jo Ho-yeon, making it impossible to determine their cause of death. The remaining 3 boys, Woo Cheol-wan, Kim Jong-sik, and Kim Yong-gyu, showed multiple injuries to their skulls, including fractures and puncture wounds. Kim Jong-sik also had a broken left arm. Among the 5 victims, Woo Cheol-wan, the oldest, had the most injuries, with as many as 25 wounds on his body. The exact time of death could not be determined, but it was likely on the day they disappeared. The forensic team concluded that the 5 boys had been murdered. After extensive testing, investigators identified a tool that could have caused the injuries observed on the victims' skulls. It was a welding tool with one pointed end and one flat end, commonly used to scrape off welding slag. While not a widely used tool, it is an essential item for welders. However, identifying the perpetrator based solely on this clue proved to be exceedingly difficult. Based on the evidence collected, the police reconstructed the sequence of events as follows. The 5 boys had gone to Waryong Mountain and spread out in the forest to search for fire salamander eggs. At some point, they were suddenly attacked by an unknown assailant. Woo Cheol-wan, the 13-year-old and the oldest of the group, resisted the attacker and sustained the most severe injuries. Kim Jong-sik tried to escape but was caught by the assailant, who struck him hard from behind. As Kim instinctively raised his left arm to shield himself, the assailant used the weapon to deliver a fatal blow to his head, causing him to collapse. Kim Yong-gyu also attempted to flee, but during a struggle, his shirt sleeve and buttons were torn. Ultimately, he too was struck on the head and killed. After the deaths of the 3 boys, the attacker subdued Park Chan-in and Yoo Ho-yeon to prevent them from escaping. The assailant removed their clothes, tied the garments into makeshift restraints, and strangled them until they stopped moving. This explains the absence of any visible injuries on their bones. Once the 5 boys were lifeless, the assailant buried their bodies in a shallow pit and placed a large rock on top. This may have been intended to prevent the boys from escaping if they regained consciousness or to mark the burial site. After committing the crime, it's possible the perpetrator returned to Waryong Mountain or lived nearby. The attacker's actions seemed both premeditated and impulsive. The premeditation is evident in the choice of weapon, a tool not commonly carried around. It may have been a type of hammer used in construction sites or factories, typically not something someone would carry casually. This suggests the attacker was prepared in advance. However, the impulsive nature is reflected in the fact that the 5 boys likely became random victims. That morning, they had decided to play on the mountain on a whim, with no prior plan. Moreover, murdering 5 people simultaneously is an extraordinarily difficult and risky act, suggesting that the perpetrator may not have specifically targeted the boys beforehand. Expert analyses of the case were quickly picked up by the media, sparking widespread debate among the public. Many questions arose, such as why the victim's hair and teeth, materials that decompose slowly, were missing from the crime scene. This led to speculation that the site where the remains were found might not have been the original crime scene. Additionally, the knots used to tie the clothing at the scene were unusual and not common in everyday life. People also questioned why, despite thorough searches years earlier, the police failed to discover the bodies at the site. The police did not provide a formal explanation for this oversight. Some suggested that the bodies had been buried too deeply and were gradually exposed after 15 years of erosion, rain, and landslides. Others theorized that the remains might have been moved to the mountain later, after police and military searches were completed, exploiting a gap in time for such actions. At the time, Waryong Mountain was a desolate area. Some speculated that the boys might have encountered someone with a history of mental illness or crossed paths with a sociopathic serial killer. Others suggested the timing of the murders, coinciding with local council elections, might indicate a politically motivated act, with the boys tragically caught in the crossfire of someone seeking to create chaos. Near the site, police discovered an artificial cave with a narrow, concealed entrance just large enough for one person to crawl through. Inside, there were signs of habitation and various objects. Based on the packaging, these items dated back to around the year 2000, nearly a decade after the incident. This suggests that someone began living in the cave only after the murders occurred. In March 2006, 15 years after the crime, the statute of limitations for criminal cases in South Korea expired. This meant that even if the perpetrator came forward, they could no longer be held criminally responsible. That same year, a new rumor began circulating. It alleged that the perpetrator was a family living near Waryong Mountain. The family reportedly had a son with an intellectual disability and owned a hunting dog. Normally, the dog was kept chained, but on the day of the incident, the family supposedly unleashed it to clean and repair its kennel. The son, failing to properly supervise the dog, allowed it to roam free. The dog allegedly attacked the 5 boys playing on the mountain. Fearing exposure, the family purportedly killed the boys to cover up the incident. They then moved away and kept the secret for years. According to the rumor, guilt eventually led them to confide in someone about what had happened. This story spread rapidly among the South Korean public, with many believing it to be true. However, it remains an unverified rumor with no concrete evidence provided by law enforcement. In February 2011, another film inspired by the Frog Boys case titled The Children was released, once again drawing public attention to the unresolved mystery. By 2015, the police officially closed the investigation. As time passed, public debate about the case gradually subsided. However, in 2021, a comment on social media unexpectedly revived interest in the case. The commenter speculated that the perpetrator might have been a teacher at the boys' school. The reasoning was twofold. First, a teacher would likely be familiar with the area's geography. Second, in the social context of that time, it was common for teachers to use corporal punishment to discipline students, giving them authority to control the boys. Following this claim, some journalists investigated the theory and ultimately concluded it was entirely baseless. A year later, another social media post presented a new hypothesis. The author suggested the murder weapon was a caliper and that the perpetrator could have been a high school student from a nearby school. Calipers, often made of metal, can inflict significant injuries. Investigations revealed that, in some schools near Waryong Mountain, there had indeed been cases where students used calipers in fights. Additionally, some students were known to gather on the mountain to smoke and drink. Based on this, the post speculated that the boys might have been attacked by a group of delinquent students. However, this theory also sparked controversy. Critics argued that while the injuries on the victims' skulls were similar to those caused by calipers, creating such wounds would require a caliper at least 12 inches long. Such calipers are bulky, difficult to carry discreetly, and easily noticeable. Therefore, the likelihood of this theory being true is considered very low. The disappearance of the Frog Boys remains a haunting memory for the people of South Korea. The case exposed critical gaps in public safety and served as a wake-up call for improving child protection mechanisms. Many parents lived in fear, worried that their own children might face similar dangers. South Korea's three most shocking mysteries include the Hwaseong serial murders, the kidnapping and murder of Lee Hyung-ho, and the disappearance of the Frog Boys. Among these, the Hwaseong serial murders were solved after 33 years, but the mystery of the Frog Boys remains unsolved. If you haven't seen the video on the Lee Hyung-ho case, I've included a link in the description. Today, people believe that with advancements in science and technology, the truth about the Frog Boys case may one day come to light. That concludes today's video. See you in the next one. Goodbye.